Hello and welcome to Indus News Live from Islamabad. I'm Meher Sher and these are the headlines. In Rawalpindi, the Chinese defense minister called on Pakistan Army's Chief General Qamar Javed Bajwa and acknowledged the military's efforts for regional peace. During the meeting, the two sides exchanged views on regional security and enhanced bilateral defense collaboration. General Bajwa thanked the Chinese minister for Beijing's support to Pakistan on all key issues. China has slapped sanctions on 4 Americans as a countermeasure against previous U.S. sanctions on Chinese officials over Hong Kong affairs. In a press briefing, a spokesperson for the Chinese ministry said the U.S. should stop interfering in Hong Kong and China's internal affairs. In Ethiopia, the defiant Tigray leaders have called on Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed to withdraw troops from the embattled region. 2 days after the Ethiopian army claimed to have captured the capital city of the Tigray region, the head of rebels said the war is not over there. He said the fighting will continue until federal troops leave the region. The death toll from COVID-19 in the U.S. has crossed 266,000 with over 13.3 million cases. India has recorded nearly 39,000 cases and 433 fatalities overnight, taking the death toll to over 137,000. Pakistan's death toll has crossed 8,000 with 40 new deaths and more than 2,800 cases in the last 24 hours. Globally, the virus has claimed 1.45 million lives and infected over 62.6 million people. And in football, Wolverhampton Wanderers beat Arsenal 2-1 in an English Premier League clash at Emirates Stadium. Pedro Neto opened the scoring for Wolves in the 27th minute, but was equalized by Gabriel 3 minutes later. Daniel Podence then put Wolves ahead in the 42nd minute, with Arsenal failing to find an equalizer. Well, those were the headlines. More news in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. And now for the news in more detail. In Rawalpindi, the Chinese defense minister called on Pakistan Army's Chief General Qamar Javed Bajwa and acknowledged the military's efforts for regional peace. During the meeting, the two sides exchanged views on regional security and enhanced bilateral defense collaboration. The Chinese minister appreciated the Pakistan Army for ensuring the security of the China-Pakistan economic corridor. General Bajwa thanked the Chinese minister for Beijing's support to Pakistan on all key issues. He said Pakistan values its time-tested and brotherly relations with China. A memorandum of understanding was also signed for the enhancement of defense cooperation between the two armies. Later, the minister laid a wreath at the Martyrs' Monument. And now Beijing has slapped sanctions on 4 Americans as a countermeasure against previous U.S. sanctions on Chinese officials over Hong Kong affairs. In a press briefing, a spokesperson for the Chinese ministry said the U.S. must stop interfering in Hong Kong and China's internal affairs. She said the U.S. nationals will be banned from entering mainland China as well as Hong Kong and Macau. Earlier this month, the U.S. said it was imposing sanctions on 4 more Chinese individuals for their role in Hong Kong's crackdown. Ties between Beijing and Washington have become strained over a host of issues, including trade, Hong Kong, and the coronavirus. And in Afghanistan, the Taliban have killed the police chief of Obey district in an ambush in western Herat province. A police spokesperson says there were no other casualties. Meanwhile, the defense ministry says it killed 7 militants in an airstrike in Jiro district of southeastern Ghazni province. It said the 7 militants were companions of Hamza Waziristani, who Afghan forces believe to be behind yesterday's attack. 34 people were killed in 2 suicide bombings yesterday. The Taliban have called the agreement with the Afghan government on procedural rules for peace talks a positive step. Taliban spokesman Dr. Mohammad Naeem said there is no clear response from Kabul on the development. However, he said a spokesman for the Kabul delegation has acknowledged that the overall procedure has been agreed upon. But he said further discussion is needed on intra-Afghan talks. Meanwhile, a member of the government team said the both sides only agreed to the 21 articles of the rules. Both sides had open talks in Qatar on September 12th, but failed to reach an agreement on the working principles. Now, the European Union says it will help vulnerable refugees in Pakistan by providing basic amenities amid COVID-19. In an interview, EU Ambassador to Pakistan, Andrula Kaminara, said the bloc has signed an MOU with the UNHCR to give $12 million to Afghan refugees. The 3-year project will benefit 370,000 migrants and their Pakistani host communities. This funding aims to promote health and social protection by constructing sanitary facilities amid a second wave of the coronavirus. And in Ethiopia, the head of Tigray People's Liberation Front says the group is still fighting near the region's capital, Mekelle. Front's head Debretsion Michael's statement comes 2 days after the government claimed capturing the city. He denied the reports of fleeing to South Sudan. Debretsion added his soldiers have captured some Eritreans fighting alongside the federal forces. Meanwhile, a spokesman for the Prime Minister said the government's priority is to bring stability in the rest of the region. She said Debretsion claims the continuation of fight should be ignored. The war in Tigray region has killed hundreds and forced thousands to flee to Sudan. And Iran has buried its assassinated nuclear scientist Mohsen Fakhrizadeh in a cemetery in northern Tehran. Earlier, Fakhrizadeh was given a state funeral. Only several dozen senior military commanders and his family attended the ceremony due to coronavirus precautions. In a televised speech, Defense Minister Brigadier General Amir Hatami said no crime will go unanswered by the Iranian people. Meanwhile, state media alleged that the weapon used in the killing was made in Israel. And moving on, in northern Iraq, a rocket attack has caused a large fire at an oil refinery, briefly halting operations. ISIS has claimed responsibility for the attack in Salahuddin province. Iraq's oil ministry says the fire broke out in fuel storage tank at the Siniya refinery. No casualties were reported. The fire was put out and operations resumed within a few hours. Authorities say the operations were halted as a security measure to prevent further damage. Houthi rebels say they have killed 8 Yemeni soldiers in a rocket attack on a military camp in Marib province. The Houthi-run Al Masirah TV says 7 other soldiers were wounded in the strike. Meanwhile, Yemeni army said 7 civilians were killed in the Houthi rocket attack on a village in Al Hudaydah city. Military said 10 others were also wounded. Yemen's Red Sea port city of Hudaydah is a vital lifeline for millions facing starvation. The city has seen a shaky ceasefire between government and Houthis after a UN-sponsored truce in Stockholm in 2018. Armenia's president has asked the government to resign and hold fresh elections within a year, calling the Russia-brokered ceasefire agreement with Azerbaijan a great national tragedy. President Armen Sarkisian said a technocrat interim government of national accord should be formed at the earliest. Sarkisian said the interim government could work for 6 months to 1 year and lead the country to early elections. He also called for major reforms to the constitution to establish better checks and balances on government. Moving on to Sri Lanka, prison guards shot dead 6 inmates and wounded 35 others while controlling a riot on the outskirts of the capital, Colombo. Police say inmates were rebelling against overcrowding at the Mahara jail amid surging coronavirus cases. 2 prison officers have been critically injured in the unrest. More than 1,000 inmates in 5 prisons have tested positive for the coronavirus and at least 2 have died. About 50 prison guards have also tested positive. Now, the prime ministers of Russia, China, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan are attending the 19th SCO summit today. The summit is being virtually hosted by India, who will be represented by a special envoy. Pakistan will be represented by its parliamentary secretary for foreign affairs. The 4 observer countries, including Iran, Afghanistan, Belarus, and Mongolia, will also participate. Turkmenistan has been invited as a special guest. The annual prime ministers level summit deals primarily with the trade and economic agenda of the organization. And moving on, in the United States, the battleground state of Wisconsin has reconfirmed President-elect Joe Biden's win by over 20,000 votes after a recount. State election officials say the recount produced minor changes in the final breakdown of over 800,000 ballots. More details in the following report.
U.S. President Donald Trump's struggle to claw his way back into the Oval Office through legal action is on a downward spiral. After setbacks in Georgia, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, Biden's overall lead over President Trump in Wisconsin has grown by 87 votes after the recount. Trump's campaign requested a recount in battleground states, making allegations of widespread electoral fraud. Biden won the presidential election with 306 Electoral College votes, leading Trump by over 6 million in popular vote. Meanwhile, the president-elect is set to receive his first intelligence briefing today. With the presidential transition picking pace, Biden unveiled his all-female senior press team. The team, led by Kate Bedingfield, comprises Jen Psaki as White House press secretary. Earlier on Sunday, President-elect Joe Biden sustained a hairline fracture in his midfoot after slipping while playing with his dog.
And India has recorded nearly 39,000 cases and 433 fatalities overnight, taking the death toll to over 137,000. The global number of deaths from the virus has crossed 1.45 million, with the caseload exceeding 62 million. More in the following report.
An unprecedented surge in coronavirus cases across the world has made it virtually impossible to imagine the return of normalcy. Canada is set to extend its restrictions for all travelers entering the country until January 2021. And authorities in Mexico warn the actual number of cases may be much higher due to low testing. The COVID-19 death toll in the US has crossed 266,000 with over 13 million cases. The top US infectious disease expert has warned of a surge upon surge in the coming weeks.
We're going to have to make decisions as a nation, state, city, and family that we're in a very difficult time, and we're going to have to do the kinds of restrictions of things we would like to have done, particularly in this holiday season, because we're entering into what's really a precarious situation because we're in the middle of a steep slope.
British authorities say the risk of a third wave is imminent in the absence of right measures to curb the virus, while a curfew in Turkey has failed to contain the second wave, with the country reporting record-high deaths for the 7th straight day. In another development, North Korea is stepping up disinfection work as cases rise in the peninsula.
We are following prevention guidelines by disinfecting all equipment and facilities within reach. As the weather is getting cold, we are enhancing a checkup on people with fever. We will keep in mind that our enemy is carelessness and self-conceit when we proceed this disinfection work.
Whereas South Korea has announced a ban on year-end parties, among other curbs, after China has also observed a slight uptick in cases, with 18 infections reported on the mainland.
And in Pakistan, 40 people have lost their lives to COVID-19 over the past 24 hours, raising the death toll to 8,025. The health ministry says over 2,800 tested positive for the virus overnight. The ministry said there are more than 48,000 active COVID-19 cases in the country. It said out of over 398,000 countrywide cases, more than 341,000 have recovered so far. The ministry said over 173,000 cases have been detected in the Sindh province, while Punjab has reported over 119,000 cases so far. We'll be back with more news after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. And now moving on, the UK has ordered British telecommunications firms not to install the new Huawei 5G kit from September. In a statement, Digital Minister Oliver Dowden says London is setting out a plan for the removal of high-risk vendors. Dowden said unprecedented powers will be used to identify and ban equipment which poses a threat to national security. He said the government is collaborating with the Japanese firm NEC. He also mentioned plans to establish new research facilities to diversify the 5G supply chain. The minister said London has already earmarked an initial $333 million investment for the trials. Earlier, Britain announced all Huawei equipment will be removed by 2027 after security fears and U.S. pressure. Huawei has termed the decision disappointing. China's Chang'e 5 lunar probe has successfully completed the combination separation. The National Space Administration says the mission is ready for a soft landing on the moon. It said the orbiter and sample return vehicle will wait for docking with the ascender on the lunar orbit. All systems of the probe are in a good condition and the communication for ground measurement and control works well. Deputy Chief Designer Peng Jing says all 4 parts of the probe will form different combinations.
Depending on the phases of the different missions and the mission every probe carries out, they form different combinations. So during its flight, the probe's configuration will be different. Some parts will be on the orbit, others will be on the surface, and still others will carry a parachute and land back on Earth.
And moving on, 13 people have died and 15 others are injured after a passenger bus and van collided in Pakistan's Punjab province. Rescue officials say both vehicles caught fire after the accident in the Sheikhupura district. Officials said low visibility due to foggy weather was a factor in the incident. They added the death toll is feared to rise as most of the injured people are in a critical condition. The deceased persons are reportedly belong to the same family who were returning from Narwhal from Lahore after attending a wedding ceremony. Now, the following years of campaigning by animal rights advocates and American pop star Cher, Pakistan's lonely elephant Kaavan has finally landed in Cambodia to start a new life in a sanctuary. Cher was on the tarmac at the airport in Siem Reap to greet Kaavan and the vets who accompanied him. She had written songs pressing for Kaavan's release from isolation at Islamabad Zoo. She also spent the last few days with him in Pakistan. Animal rescue organization Four Paws said Kaavan had another 90-minute drive ahead and will be released in daylight on Tuesday. Now, the eruption of one of Indonesia's most dangerous volcanoes has caused panic and evacuation of nearly 3,000 residents. The government says no casualties have been reported so far, but the displaced need money and aid. Authorities have warned the nearby areas of hot clouds, lava avalanche, and poisonous gas. They added the volcano has acquired the second highest level on the country's 4-tier alert system due to its increasing threat. Indonesia has nearly 130 active volcanoes, more than any other country. And in Australia, guests at Fraser Island's largest resort have been told to leave as a significant bushfire continues to burn. Firefighters are struggling to control the blaze that has already destroyed 40% of the World Heritage-listed island. Temperatures are forecast to peak at 34 degrees Celsius as a heat wave sweeps across the region. Incident controller James Haig said the vegetation is extremely dry and easy to ignite. He said firefighters are also stymied by limited access to the blaze in the island's remote north. Queensland Parks and Wildlife Service said the fire was burning on 2 fronts across 74,000 hectares. It said the blaze is not threatening properties. Also, New Zealand has filed charges against 13 parties over the fatal volcanic eruption on White Island last year. The country's primary regulator, WorkSafe, says the parties did not meet safety obligations while taking tourists there. WorkSafe Chief Executive Phil Parks says 10 organizations have been charged under the Health and Safety at Work Act. Each charge carries a maximum fine of $1.06 million US. A further 3 have been charged as directors or individuals and face maximum fines of $211,000 US. The coroner's office says they are conducting a separate investigation to examine whether criminal charges should be laid. The surprise eruption of the volcano in December 2019 killed 22 tourists and injured dozens. Argentine prosecutors are investigating Diego Maradona's doctor for possible manslaughter following his death 4 days ago. Police in Buenos Aires have raided the house and private clinic of Leopoldo Luque. The police are trying to establish if there was negligence in Maradona's treatment following the surgery. The 60-year-old died of a heart attack at his home where he was recuperating. Dr. Luque denies any wrongdoing. The football legend scored 34 goals in 91 appearances for Argentina, representing them in 4 World Cups. And now moving on to the world of business, European stocks are trading mixed as investors pause to assess the challenges faced by an early rollout of the COVID-19 vaccine. Europe's stock 600 has slipped under the flat line. The CAC 40 in Paris and Italy's FTSE MIB have shed as well. But London's FTSE and Frankfurt's DAX have edged up marginally. Earlier, most Asian bourses edged lower with the exception of mainland Chinese stocks. China's manufacturing sector's Purchasing Managers Index has registered a remarkable growth in November. The index is an indicator of economic health and business conditions for the manufacturing sector. National Bureau of Statistics says in November the index came in at 52.1% with an increase of 0.7% from October. It said the rise is a record high during 2020 so far. For consecutive 5 months now, the country's PMI has remained over the 51% mark. Beijing says 19 out of 21 industries surveyed reported their PMI in the expansion range.
This reflects accelerated unleashing of the capacity of both production and demand in these industries, with notable achievements in the overall planning for COVID-19 prevention and control and economic and social development. China's economic recovery has maintained a positive momentum amid continued stability.
Now moving on to sports and football, Wolverhampton Wanderers beat Arsenal 2-1 in a Premier League clash at Emirates Stadium. The Gunners sit 14th in the table after 5 losses in 10 league games. Pedro Neto opened the scoring for Wolves in the 27th minute, but was equalized by Gabriel 3 minutes later. Daniel Podence then put the Wolves ahead in the 42nd minute, with Arsenal failing to find an equalizer. This is Arsenal's worst start to a season since 1981. In another fixture, Chelsea played a goalless draw against Tottenham Hotspurs at Stamford Bridge, while Manchester United came from behind to beat Southampton 3-2 at St. Mary's Stadium. Meanwhile, AC Milan beat Fiorentina 2-0 at San Siro to maintain their dominance on the Serie A table. Alessio Romagnoli and Frank Kessie scored goals for the hosts. Romagnoli put Milan ahead in the 17th minute, and Kessie added a second goal from a penalty 11 minutes later. Milan are now 21 Serie A games unbeaten since losing to Genoa in March. They top the table with 23 points from 9 matches and 5 clear of nearest rivals Inter Milan. In another fixture, Napoli thrashed Roma 4-0 at Stadio San Paolo. Lorenzo Insigne put Napoli ahead with a sublime free kick in the 30th minute. Fabian Ruiz, Dries Martins, and Matteo Politano added 3 more goals in the second half to hand Roma their first defeat of the season. And now it's time to take a look at the latest weather updates from around the world. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.